Welcome to All Things Considered CX, the podcast where we challenge the status quo of customer experience. Hosted by Bob Asman, this show is all about disrupting practices and redefining what it means to truly connect with customers. In this unhinged approach to CX, we're focused on building better experiences from the ground up. Each episode, Bob dives into the bold ideas, unconventional strategies, and fresh perspectives that are shaking up the world of CX. We're bringing you the voices that are pushing boundaries and changing the game. If you're ready to rethink how customer experience is done and drive real transformation, you're in the right place. Let's get into today's episode of All Things Considered CX.
Hello, welcome back. We're ready for another episode of our podcast, looking at and talking to guests who are disrupting the customer experience industry. And so we're really happy today to have Matt Taylor joining us from Knowbl. Matt, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the company.
Thanks, Bob, for having me, and really happy to get in this conversation today. So my name's Matt Taylor, co-founder and CPO of Knowbl. At Knowbl, we are transforming customer experience through conversational automation. So any type of customer experience, whether it's in chat or voice, we're automating those types of experiences through AI, leveraging the latest in AI, which is large language models. So we started our journey in 2021. At that point, what we called pre-ChatGPT. And since then, we've worked with very large enterprises across the Fortune 500 in retail, automotive, financial services, and insurance verticals. And we're continuing to expand our products to be able to not just help customers, but also agents as they go through and talk with customers and being able to make them more efficient.
Mm-hmm. Great. And that's one of the reasons in doing my research, I asked Matt to come on and talk about the company because AI is such a hot topic right now within customer service and contact centers. And we're going to get into that. But hey, Matt, people don't wake up, when they're little and say, I want to be in this, I want to be a CPO at an AI company. So how do you get to do this? What
Yeah.
inspired you to get here?
Yeah, I mean, my career path's definitely been unique in the sense that, when I graduated school, I know I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know exactly how that would happen. So, in the back of my mind, I always knew that was the goal. But it started with, I went to do consulting at PwC. That was kind of what was told to me is, if you're not exactly sure what you want to do consulting. It gives you the most exposure. Within a few days there, they had started an innovation lab. And so I asked if I could join that innovation lab where essentially they were looking for art of the possible technologies, prototypes that they could bring to their existing client base, which at that point our group was the financial services sector. So basically every large bank in the US you could think of, we were working with on some degree. And so, working in that innovation lab, conversational AI became a pretty hot topic. It wasn't what it is now, but that was the art of the possible that we were showing a lot of our customers. And at that time, a company called Clink was out of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I had a couple friends that actually worked there because I went to the University of Michigan and, was hearing a lot of good things about the company. And at that point, they were still pretty new. And so they had engineering and sales, but didn't really have a product org. And at that time, they were starting to invest heavily in product management. And so it looked like a good time for me to make that move and spent 3 years at Clink as product manager, specifically working on their virtual assistant for banking, which we called Feeney, stood for Financial Genie. And that's what most of our customers leveraged. And so that's really where I got the exposure and understanding of how this market works. And from there started to see where there was huge gaps from the lack of speed. Like we would take 2 years before we would launch a virtual assistant, the inability to adapt to the voice of the customer. So during the times where we were working with these large banks, that was during COVID. So that was, very unique time for these banks. A lot of times the customers were asking questions they weren't prepared for. So as, the product owner, we're supposed to, figure out exactly what we need that virtual assistant to do in those scenarios. And because the technology was very difficult to adapt, that was a time where, I started to have conversations with those around the company, and actually worked out well, where I work closely with our chief architect over at Clink, and he was a PhD on the academia side, and really started to show me what LLMs were, at that point still, more academia focused, and was lucky enough to get a good relationship with him, and so we actually ended up starting Knowbl with another peer of ours. He is a CEO of Digital Roots, and his company got acquired by a competitor of Clink called Interactions, and so us three got together, Jay Wolcott, Parker Hill, and myself in 2021, and really, that's how this all happened. So it definitely wasn't the traditional, career path, but happy to be here nonetheless.
And I love the fact you were bold enough to start a company in the midst of COVID. Uh, that is definitely an entrepreneur at work there. That's a great summary of your background. So I want to talk about what Knowbl does, but I want to start with what was also intriguing to me is you're working across a lot of different industries with a lot of different clients. And
Mhm.
so, what are you hearing out there in terms of customer experience and AI? And there's just so much noise, and I mean that in a positive way about AI, that I'm curious as to somebody who's in the trenches with their customers. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that naturally happens when, something like a new technology, or at least it feels like a new technology with ChatGPT comes out, is there's a lot of solution chasing where, a lot of these enterprise execs are almost given mandates of, hey, we need to, bring AI into the business. And so they're focusing so heavily on the features of AI and all the things that they read about. But the first thing I say to any of our clients is, if we can't attach this to a business problem that you're going to be able to see, value through, clear metrics, KPIs, then it's not worth it, because I can't tell you how many times we've gotten started on a proof of concept or a pilot that, at the end it's, hey, the technology works, but the value isn't quite there. And so I would say the biggest thing I've noticed is the the forgetting of what we're trying to do here, right? Like we all have to solve a problem. Like AI is a toolbox, right? And it's great to have this toolbox that can do a lot of things, but if you don't know what you're trying to fix and you're just aimlessly going out there trying to, put these different tools in different places, it's not going to end up creating value for the customer. And, I think one of the things we can get into is, the way that contact centers have been looked at as cost cutting centers, and not so much experience centers. And I do think that will change over time, because at some point we are going to live in a world where the customer experience, think about any type of big brand that you deal with, that customer experience is going to soon be the differentiator between the products, and there's going to be more and more parity with the technology, that if you don't invest in this technology to enhance your customer experience, you're not going to be able to compete with your fellow peers. So happy to get into any part of that. But yeah, right now I'd say the biggest thing I'd say that I currently advise most of our clients on is, don't get caught just solution chasing, and actually try to address what the problems are.
I mean, that tail wagging the dog syndrome is, I mean, I've been talking and writing about that for 20 years, where, for a number of years, I would be hired to come in to an organization as an employee, and the CEO would say to me, I got a problem in customer service, go fix it. And I'd say, well, the problem probably isn't in customer service, right? It's probably somewhere else, and that's what's driving all the calls and contacts
Mhm.
into service. And what you're pointing out is the same thing that's happening with technology. Hey, I got to improve my experience, so I'm going to go out and buy technology. And then 2 years later, I'm brought in to say, why isn't the technology working the way it's supposed to? Well, you didn't know what the problem was, right? Or you solved the wrong problem. And so that's so spot on with what you're saying. And I think I'm depressed now, Matt, because it's still happening. Yeah, I would think after all this time it would stop happening. But and the other comment you made, I think it's an excellent one, is about value and the value of contact centers as profit centers or experience centers. I like that term that you said versus cost centers. But we tend to do that in contact centers, right? We tend to run after AI can cut my costs. Why is that? How do you turn that corner for your customers to say, hey, this can be an experience rather than a cost cutting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that starts from the top down, right? Executive leadership is going to always be crucial, and if they're measured off, what their profitability is, how much, they can reduce costs, that's going to continue to be their focus. I think we're getting to a point where both can coexist in the sense that like you can cut your costs, but also increase the experience for the customer. It's just I think the biggest thing that I'm starting to see happen across these enterprise is starting to map out the customer journey so that it is easier to be able to prove out that, hey, if we can actually make this a better experience for the customer so that when they do have a problem, they call in, they're not transferred 5 different times, they're not put on hold for 30 minutes, and that we're actually to get that customer what they want. That's going to somehow circle back into that customer becoming a better customer for us, whether it's those NPS or, any type of CSAT survey, wherever it is, identifying how that customer be like not just giving them, hey, like we're reducing costs for this because they only called in once, but we're actually giving them a better experience. Connecting the dots on those metrics is it's slowly but surely happening. I think that's when you start to see it because once some of these a lot of these budgets are designed in the sense of like, hey, like they can only spend on the technology what they're actually able to reduce in the cost. But if they can show the value elsewhere, then they're gonna be able to share that budget amongst other, owners, whether that's, you're seeing new titles even coming up with chief experience owners or, product experience owners, customer experience owners, all of those being able to kind of share those budgets. So we're starting to see that across some of these enterprises, but I think it's gonna, happen slowly over time. But yeah, I think at some point, like you're gonna have to look at it as an experience center and not just a hey, we need to reduce costs and outsource these calls and the cheapest way possible.
Hmm. And so, Matt, when you talk about ROI is the other hot topic in customer experience right now. Everybody's trying to prove um, the ROI of customer experience, and I think we kind of dug our own hole there because I think we spent too many years talking about well, you have to do this because you want to improve your customer experience. While heads of operations were saying, if you give me $1 million for a new plant, I'll return $2 million to your bottom line. So we were kind of mom and apple pie while everybody else was giving real hard dollars. So to your point, are is what you do able to give those hard dollars to the clients you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we don't have business cases to support, what we're trying to achieve, the projects don't move forward. That's I've seen that going back to my days at Clink and Noble. So the business value has to be very clear. And so the one thing I'll say is there's no metric that cuts through all of these enterprises. Each use case is going to be individually different, especially if you have one that's more agent focusing, then it's going to be AHT, agent efficiency, agent churn. Like there's going to be a lot of metrics that you can capture if you're going directly to the customer, tracking not just, hey, like, was that call contained, but was it resolved, right? And I think those are two different definitions that have been conflated over time in the sense that someone hangs up and that used to be called a contained call. Like, okay, great job. But like that person calls right back 10 minutes later and, now even more frustrated than the first time. That's not a contained call. So asking them if the call was if they were able to achieve what they set out to do on that call and actually getting that confirmation, that's resolution. And so being able to measure some of these metrics during these launches, that's when you're going to be able to actually measure that hardcore value, that the bottom line. And so we see that quite a bit. And The other thing too, I think that, ends up starting as soft value, but ends up becoming a lot bigger is what I always say is the voice of the customer. So we live in this world where you'd be surprised how many of these enterprises actually don't know what their customers are even calling about. So we worked with the Fortune 20 retailer and they're like, hey, order statuses are as high as call driver, right? And so we get in there and we start handling these order status calls. And we start to come to find out the only reason people are saying order status, it was the first thing on their IVR menu. So people are just trying to get through that IVR menu to get to a human. So the majority of these people are saying order status when they don't even want their order status. And then the ones who actually want to figure out, hey, they have a damaged order or they're missing their order, they bucketed them in this call of order status and they thought, okay, if we just give them the status of their order, that's all they want. And it's like, no, that's where you have to understand the voice of the customer. And I will say with the technology that's available now with these LLMs, we're able to analyze these transcripts in a way that shows them a huge missing piece of the pie in terms of, hey, like you guys think order status is a call. Let's go a layer deeper. The majority of these people that are calling about their order status, it's because there's actually an issue with their order. And we can now start tracking what that issue looks like and how to resolve it from the very top down so it doesn't end up even becoming a call in the first place. But with all of that, I think the voice of the customer feeds into this larger scheme of the whole business in general, right? Like, we're also working with a very large automotive client, and on their site, they have a virtual assistant, and that's ours that powers that. But what we're able to give them, besides just answering customer questions that no longer need agents, is the ability to see what content people are asking about that they might not have already. And so that gives the web team and the content team so much information of where they need to develop more content, where they need to, put more eggs in their basket in terms of that knowledge based material that's going to feed into those customer experiences. So there's the bottom line value that's very clear that we always need, but then there's all that other value that comes along with these virtual assistants that we see through the voice of the customer.
Hmm. And Matt, do you see differences across industry, or are you pretty much? I know by company it could vary, but are you seeing industries pretty consistent, or are there significant differences? You were talking about retail, automotive, and financial services.
I mean, I think there's some definite similarities in across some of these industries. Like I think there's also this pre-sale, post-sale support that becomes big in terms of where the customer's coming into their journey, right? So whether it's retail, automotive, financial services, if a customer is not a customer yet, right? They're coming to a website, they're trying to find information, they're trying to understand how can I work with this brand or what does that look like? Those experiences are very different than a post customer, that's more support heavy, where we already have their information. We might even be able to understand why they're calling in the first place because we have that information. It's a very different experience. I always, I call it pre-auth and post-auth. The authentication allows us as a vendor and even the brand to understand who their customer is a lot more and be a little bit more predictive with the actions, be able to just be more personalized with a lot of the responses. So I think those are the big differences. But then across industries, there's obviously going to be differences in some of the patterns, the ways that questions are asked. Like in automotive, one of the things we saw very early on is that we had to fine tune the model to be able to understand a lot of these vehicles, right? Like that's not common language to know all of these vehicles. So using these open source models is not just going to cut it. We had to do quite a bit of fine tuning on top to get it to the point where it's able to understand all the differences, the specs. It gets a little bit more complex. Whereas, banking, for example, a lot of that banking language is already part of those models. They already understand quite a bit of that normal everyday speak when someone's trying to open a checking account or a savings account or money market. So yeah, I think there's definitely some differences and nuances when it comes to the actual language part. But yeah, I think the big thing I always focus on from the difference in the experiences is do we know who this customer is or not? Because depending on if we do or not, that's going to have a huge impact on how we even approach the situation.
Hmm. I mean, your 2 points so well taken about, I'm solving the wrong problem, or I don't dig deep enough. I just, I thought it was order status, but it's really something else. And then do we know who the customer is? I mean, those are key elements that I find it's just people have trouble getting to the core root cause issues of those. Um, uh, Listeners, great conversation with Matt Taylor from Knowbl talking about disruptive CX and how we're addressing that. Matt, let's in our remaining minutes deep dive into what Knowbl does and maybe highlight some of those areas that you've touched on a few of them, but where you could really help get a better experience for your clients.
Yeah, so at Noble, the first thing we do when we work with any enterprise is try to understand what problem they're trying to solve across the different channels that they have, right? So if they're looking at cutting costs, within the contact center and that's a focus, great, let's look at what are your customers currently calling about. And again, like not just relying on the overall, agent bucketing that they have from a classification perspective, but hey, can we get those transcripts? And once we get transcripts, we always say that's the roadmap for us because what now understanding exactly what the customer's talking about, we can now go in there and say, okay, hey, these calls are not meant for automation, right? Like there's certain calls that that are going to need a human. And again, LLMs are really good at being able to identify patterns and repetition in these calls of, oh, these are calls where someone is just asking about an order status, or hey, this call is just someone wants to update their account information. Like these ones are built really well for automation and then working with the client to be able to understand, okay, do you have the content or knowledge available to be able to provide answers, right? Because even if we understand that this is built for automation, if the brand doesn't have that information or that content to provide to that customer, then they're going to have to develop that. And we work with them to do that. Like generative AI can also help with that as well. But then there's also the ability to, okay, what APIs do you have available? So we do a full service when we work with our clients, but we do have a platform that they can end up building these experiences on. But at the end of the day, what we are always looking to do is figure out where we can provide value across, across any channel, whether it's voice or chat, and being able to automate that conversation. And sometimes that's just helping the agent be able to search information easier or be able to recommend responses to them, or it's directly to the customer and being able to provide that customer information from those APIs that the brand has available or the content that they have in their knowledge base. So yeah, really helping the customer's experience become a lot less friction, or reducing that friction is a big goal of ours.
Hmm. I think it's great. Well, reducing friction is just absolutely should be at the core, like you said, and I think the fact that you're really challenging clients to think about, you know, you can't apply this to every call. I think that's a really interesting approach that you and Noble are taking, because a lot of times it's we'll take all the calls or we'll solve all the problems. I've been involved with companies that say we want to outsource all of our calls, and so they're you look at the calls and you say you really want to get rid of your top 10 customers to an outsourcing. Not that there's anything wrong with outsourcing, but do you really want to take your core competency away? And I think to take that approach and to really challenge customers, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, like anyone in this industry who tells you that humans aren't needed at this point, and even I think decently in the future. Obviously, no one knows what's going to happen 10, 20 years from now, but I just think about I always relate to, how I use brands, right? Like there's certain experiences that I just know a person's going to be needed because there's certain uniqueness to my call. There's need for empathy. There's need for, sometimes what agents are able to do, or supervisors of agents are able to skirt the rules and be able to do something that, a bot won't be able to do. Because you wouldn't want a bot be able to do that at scale. Maybe they recognize that my loyalty as a customer is worth being able to figure out how they can give me an experience that they might not give every customer. So at the end of the day, there's always going to be a need for humans in these calls. It's just figuring out the right way to approach it because if you can keep your humans fresh and able to answer calls that are meant for them as opposed to the mundane, over and over types of tasks that they have to do, that's when you're going to get the best experience. And it's always so funny to me where the concern is always like, oh, well, like we're going to be done with humans and like we're like, they're not going to have jobs anymore. I'm like, I have you ever called in and, like, never had to wait on hold? Like, there's plenty of opportunity to, like, not like, can you imagine a customer experience where you called any brand, like your insurance company, and if you need to talk to a human, you get to one right away? Like, guys, like, the difference between, like, where we're at and where we can be is so drastically different that there's always gonna be need for humans, so, yeah.
I just think that's a phenomenal perspective, Matt, that you're bringing to this effort because we do tend to be extreme in our approaches. It's AI is going to take every job away from customer service, and we won't need customer service anymore. And I mean, part of that is, well, you don't need customer service if you're doing things right on the front end. If you're pricing it right and designing it right and building the product right, you have customer service for a reason. But then if you can balance that out, it just makes so much sense. A lot of sense. So, okay, Matt, look at your crystal ball. Tell us where we're going. What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where I think the technology is getting to a point where there is a lot more parity between the models. Everyone's all these massive startups. You can't even call OpenAI a startup these days, but those companies have created these models, right? And so what it has changed in my perspective on the industry is the parity's gotten to the point where it's no longer now just, okay, like, is this model going to be able to understand what the customer's saying? But now being able to actually understand the best way to use those models within each brand. I think it's going to become like, especially with large enterprises, it's going to get to the point where a lot of the value is being able to map out customer journeys, be able to identify where there's problems. It's less of like, hey, the technology is the issue. Like for the longest time, the technology was the issue. We knew, for
Mm,
example, when we're working with these banks, hey, like everyone's coming in and asking, like questions about if they can make this account transfer or during COVID, like, hey, everyone's asking if they can have loan forgiveness. And we weren't able to build it. Like we just like the technology wasn't adaptable enough. Now I don't think the issue is going to be on the technology side. I actually think it's going to be figuring out where you plug that technology in. And does the business have the right minds in place, the right teaming in place to make this efficient? I think the one thing that's always going to be, it's always interesting dynamics is the IT and business within these large enterprises. IT wants to always own the technology, but then business is responsible for the success of the technology. So at some point, I would love to see those two come together in a little bit more of a healthy relationship. But in terms of where we're going
mm,
in the grand scheme of customer experiences, I think it gets to the point where a lot of the calls that we would expect to be handled by AI are, and the ones that we would just not expect are not. And I know that sounds pretty obvious, but if you think about it today, like everyone, all these enterprises are talking about all these experiences they're launching. I'm like, where? Because every time I go to work with the brands that I like, that I have problems with or I call, I'm still talking to the chatbot online that's press one for this, two for this. I'm still on the IVR menu trying to get through to understand like where I can finally get transferred. Like the experiences that are being launched, I don't know if it's this secret universe, but at some point, those experiences will be available to us. And I think it's going to take longer than people think. I think they see ChatGPT out here and they're like, oh, like, well, I'm using ChatGPT. Why can't I use it across all these enterprises? And I think you're going to see that these enterprises, unfortunately, are not able to move at the speed you would like. And if they don't move at the speed that you would like, there will be disruptors. There's going to be, new companies that come in and base their whole relevance off of the idea of how they can leverage AI. I mean, think about like all the companies that came in and displaced, these legacy industries like taxis, and now you have Uber, and now, think about Airbnb, like displacing the need for hotels. And I think you're going to start to see some new companies come in, whether it's insurance, banking, retail, and take over, because if the giants aren't going to adapt and make themselves a technology first company in the sense that, hey, we're going to invest in this heavily, then they're going to fall behind. And so I do think that you're going to see some disruptors in that space, just where they're going to be looked at as the AI companies, not just the .com or mobile app companies.
I think you're spot on. I think we absolutely are ripe for that kind of disruption to come in. And I think some organizations say, oh, that was, that happened to the hospitality industry, that happened in the transportation industry. It can't happen to us. And then, Amazon goes into prescription drugs or something like that. And you go, oh, wait a minute, it's possible that there will be disruptors there. So I think that's a great perspective. Matt, this has been a great discussion. Before we go, how can people get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about Knowbl?
Yeah, if you could go to our site, knowbl.com, knowbl.com. You could find me on LinkedIn as well if you'd like to, request myself. I'm Matthew Taylor. And if you do need to reach me, you can reach me on email at matt@knowbl.com. Happy to have a conversation. One thing, I always say with anyone is, we're here to help everyone, but we're also not the ones to help everyone. So if you have an issue, whether you're a smaller customer that might be outside our profile, I'm still happy to kind of guide you and see where we can help. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. If I can't help you, I'm sure I can find someone who can.
Outstanding. Thanks again, Matt, for a great conversation. We appreciate it. And listeners, as always, stay tuned for another episode of the All Things Considered CX podcast. Until next time, thank you.